My name is Alec, and welcome to the first episode of the re-recorded Hero's Journey series. If you've been following this channel at all, you probably know that this exists already. There's a series that talks about the hero's journey. But the reality is that I look like a guy who was lost in the Misty Mountains for like a year and then was found by the elves and
look at it.
Recorded a thank you video right after. So I thought, this has not aged well, let's do a re-record of it. And here we go. Here we are, 1 year later. It was the first months of the pandemic and it shows. Now we're on the rear end of it, hopefully. And it's interesting because the pandemic in itself has been a hero's journey for all of us, I think. So here we are. I'm not going to talk about the pandemic, though. I'm just going to talk about the hero's journey. Maybe some of you will in your essay. We'll find out. But yes, welcome. This is the first part of a multi-part series that will guide you along in creating your own story. Today, we will be talking about the hero's journey and how we can apply this structure to any story and how this structure exists in many stories that we are already familiar with. Before we begin, we have to understand what the hero journey is. So, in storytelling and narrative, the hero's journey is a template or a common structure that divides the journey that our protagonist goes through in 3 different acts. So we have a departure act, which is kind of what we're going to talk about here today, the initiation act, and then the return act. And even though this has already existed for quite a long time, it was not until 1949 when Joseph Campbell, influenced by Carl Jung, wrote The Hero with 1,000 Faces, where we can see the narrative pattern as follows. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boon or provide blessings on his fellow men. So these 3 acts are divided into smaller segments, and these help drive the story forward, as you probably can see on the screen in one point or another. In Campbell's work, there are 17 stages, but we're going to use Christopher Vogler's template that has 12 stages. In the departure stage, which is kind of what we're going to work with today, we have the ordinary world, the call to adventure, the refusal of the call, meeting with the mentor, and crossing the first threshold. This is where we first meet our character, we understand the rules and the characteristics of the world the story is set in, and we learn about the motivations and drivers that people in the story have. So if we were to look at Freitag's Pyramid, for example, we would find that this part would be equivalent to the exposition of the story and the inciting incident. And this part is usually just a fragment, a short fragment of the runtime in movies or just a few pages in a book. It's super important to get this right, because if the first stages of the journey are not clear or convincing enough, then the rest of the story is going to be shaky at best. This is crucial as well because this is where you can create relatable, believable characters. The big fight or the main race or anything that may come in the 3rd act is only exciting if everything else works. Character creation is key. In this case, if you're going to be talking about yourself as a main character, it's important to explain to us who you are because we don't know you. I mean, we know you to an extent, but we don't know you as well as you know yourself. So if you're talking from a first-person perspective, you need to establish, why is this story important? Why should we care about everything else that you're about to say? So the second part, which is called initiation, has 4 parts to it. Tests, allies, and enemies, approach to the inmost cave, the ordeal, and the reward. And this is where we usually have like a training montage, like in Rocky, running up a hill or some steps or learning how to fight or maybe studying for something that is important. This is just kind of where things get rolling. In most movies and books, this is where the character embraces a journey and sets out to face challenges, adventures, peril, and everything else that is exciting. This is where we meet allies, mentors, where friendships are forged or broken, where the person learns how to do things or should learn how to do things, and the plot begins to form. And it's also the longest part of a story. It's the second act. So your third act, which is the payoff, will only be as good as how well you build it in the second act. Finally, part 3, which is the return, is when the hero takes the road back, there's a resurrection, and there's a return with the elixir. And this is the true climax of the story, right? Even though we had the ordeal, which is a synonym for a problem or difficulty, and we had that in the previous section, this, on the road back in the resurrection, is when the character faces the biggest challenges yet. So it is the final showdown, the climactic scene at the end of every Marvel movie. The main conflict is solved. And then the hero can go back to the people in triumph with something to show for their efforts. It doesn't need to be an elixir. This is because of what classic stories this is formed around, but it can be anything: a trophy, a prize, wisdom, knowledge, etc. So today's video will focus on the first 3 stages of the departure act, which is the ordinary world, the call to adventure, and the refusal of the call. Just like in the previous recording of the series, I'm going to use my own story as an example. And I'm going to use the same story. I'm not going to change anything, just so that if you wish to watch this video or the other video, it's all the same.
I mean, look at it.
And the reason why I'm also going to use this story is because I feel that it comes very close to what Bilbo's experience was in The Hobbit. So where do we start? Okay, my ordinary world is in Tecate, which is a small town where I used to live. And like I said, my story and Bilbo's story were pretty similar. I live with my parents, I devoted my time to hobbies, and I didn't expect much of anything. This was especially true when I was in high school. All the time, like Bilbo, I was daydreaming of moving to a different country, living somewhere else, traveling, but I could never make the decision of moving out of my parents' house or going out and meet the world. So I wasn't any braver than Bilbo is at the beginning of his story. I guess you could say I had a lot of potential, but I wasn't living up to that potential. So if I had to sum it up in one sentence, I was a small town boy that I probably would have ended up studying at the local college and getting a 9-to-5 job and having a regular family, which nothing wrong with that. It's just not very adventurous, right? I would have been a respectable hobbit, but I would not have been a very exciting hobbit. Establishing my ordinary world is easy, but it gets a little bit more complicated when I think about the call to adventure, because I feel that most of us don't get 13 dwarves knocking on a door in the middle of the night, and it's a little bit harder to realize when we learn that the world was calling out for us. In my case, it was more abstract, and I think there were multiple calls to adventure, which is probably what you will notice in your own story as well. The first call to adventure that I can recall was when I went to Wiese in Tijuana with my dad. And I think I was 10 years old, maybe. He was getting a degree as a language teacher, and they asked if maybe I would like to study there. They said it as a joke at the time, and I remember saying that I would rather die than studying in Tijuana. It didn't seem like a place I wanted to be at. I hated this city, and I couldn't picture leaving the trees and the smell of the brewery and the afternoons and the sunsets that I grew up with in Tecate just for concrete and smog and crowds and crime. I did not want to take any part in that. To me, that is what Tijuana was, and I just didn't want to be here. Then the second call to adventure came when I was in high school and my parents were worried about education, and they said that maybe I should study at cities where you guys are now. And I also said that I was definitely not going to do that. They thought that it was going to be a good idea, but I did not want to. I was not going to leave my friends and my girlfriend, because there's always a sweetheart involved in these decisions, and I was not going to do that. And it's funny because this is where I ended up teaching, but that's how life works. So the third and final call came when I was in college. And it's interesting because eventually school dragged me here and I ended up studying in the place where I didn't want to, but I wanted to study history. Only Tijuana had it. And so I ended up studying here for college. I was reluctant and I never really felt like I wanted to explore or live like in the city. I commuted every day back and forth from Tecate to Tijuana. And even though, yes, it was exhausting at times, that was just the way I liked it. I mean, I was still, and some people might say that I still am, a small town boy at heart, and I would continue to be one until I met some mentors who dragged me to the city finally. But that's gonna need to wait until the next video when we talk about the refusal of the call once again, and we meet the mentor and we finally cross the threshold. So to recap, today's video was about the first 3 stages in the hero's journey: the ordinary world, the call to adventure, and the refusal of the call. Please stay tuned for next week when we talk about the following stages. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the classroom. Have a great day. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.